Good morning everyone and welcome to this month's webinar in which we're going to be looking at the forthcoming reforms to statutory sick pay. And as usual, before we start, we do like to introduce ourselves to everybody. So I'm Victoria Templeton. I'm the HR Knowledge Manager here at HR Solutions. And this month I'm joined by Abby Ashford. Abby is our Head of Consultancy Services and she'll be bringing a wealth of knowledge to today's event on the topic we'll be covering. And because we've got so many of you here today, we've placed you all on mute. However, as usual, we do want to get your involvement in today's webinar. And we'll do that by inviting you to ask us your questions. And we'll aim to answer as many as we can at the end of the webinar today, depending on the time that we have available. So on the screen now, you'll see an image of what your GoToWebinar question panel looks like. So please simply type your question in. And then, as I said, we'll aim to read out and answer as many as we can at the end. We also like to make our webinars as engaging as possible, and we'll do this by using polls. These not only help to steer the webinar, but it allows us to all share how the topic's being managed in our own workplaces, and therefore can help share ideas of best practice and is helpful to others to know what other organisations are doing. So when you see this slide, we will be running a poll. They are confidential, so we just simply publish the results to the questions. And as I said, we welcome as many of you today to answer and participate in those, sharing with us your insights. So looking at the agenda for today, we're going to start with understanding the statutory sick pay reforms. We'll then move on to consider the potential implications of these reforms and how employers can implement strategies to mitigate against the risk of rising sickness levels. And finally, before Abby and I take your questions, I'm going to bring a couple of important considerations to your attention that aren't necessarily directly related to these particular reforms that will impact on them. So what we'll do first to kickstart our session today, we're going to run several polls. So if I just bear with me and I'll launch the first poll. And it's really to understand the type of business that you work within. And this gets us to understand our audience that little bit better. I'll keep it open a little bit longer. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and share the results. So actually we've got people from all of the different categories. So predominantly the small to medium. And of course, we are seeing more and more people join us from larger organisations that employ more than 250. So welcome everyone. And let's just put the next poll up. And this one is all to do with human resource management in your business and who is responsible for that. Okay, just keep the poll open a little bit longer. Okay, let's bring that to a close and let's share with everybody how we're all managing our human resources. So, good spread across the board. In-house HR team, in-house HR manager, one person, no team, is the largest there. And 9% outsourced. So if you're one of our clients, then thank you for joining us and welcome. And welcome to everybody. So we have business owners and office managers as well. So it's just interesting to see how human resource management is managed. And this coming next year and a half is going to be critical, whether you work in HR or you don't, but you get involved in it. So do keep up to date with our updates that we run. So thank you. I'm going to hide that, and I've got a couple of quick other polls, and this is relating to statutory sick pay. And really, are you aware of the forthcoming changes to the legislation involving statutory sick pay? Okay, just a few more seconds and then I'll close the poll. Okay, let's close this poll and we'll share the results. So generally even, so 56% though, however, are aware, which is great. And then 44%. Hopefully today's webinar and what we talk through today will get you thinking about if there's anything that you're going to need to be doing in your organisation to help prepare for the changes. I guess, Abby, from a question for you point of views, how does these results show? Is that what you expected? What's your sort of view from a client perspective?
Yeah, it is what I expected, because there is so much out there in the press at the moment about lots of different change that's happening and how it's going to impact on employers. And a little bit of scaremongering, but also there's the reality of we are going to be having so much change to get used to this year and next. So yeah, it's very realistic, I think, that people are on this webinar today, some with knowledge, some just wanting to know, okay, what do I need to know and how is it going to impact me? Those are the key things, I think, and I'm pretty sure that we can answer that today.
Brilliant. Thank you, Abby. I'm going to move on to the final poll in this section. And for those of you that are aware, have you actually considered the implications for your business? Just keep it open for a little bit longer. Okay, let's close that poll and share the results. And I think 61% haven't, but 39% great, you have. And I think this is probably one of several of the reforms that is going to be significant. And as I talk through, perhaps you'll see why. And so taking steps now, even though we haven't got concrete dates in terms of when it's all happening, and you know, it is still only a bill, it's not an act of law. I think taking steps now to prepare is going to be essential, which we will cover in this webinar. Again, Abby, does that surprise you from your perspective?
No, it doesn't. I think the thing is, people will be considering what the implications are, but not necessarily knowing them fully. And initially people will be thinking, oh, here's another cost on employer. We've got tariffs we're dealing with, there's the huge NI costs, this is just another thing. So that's the initial response from most SMEs. But then the wider bit is what we're going to be talking about as well, which is the knock-on impact on policies, processes, terms and conditions. So there's a lot to just have on HR managers' radar. So it's really good that we're going through this today.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely agree. So let's hide that and I'll move on to getting started to understand the statutory sick pay reforms. And really, it's just to take you through, first of all, currently the position. So SSP is paid to eligible employees at the moment, and it kicks in from the 4th consecutive day of absence. Where an employee is eligible, then it's based on a threshold of earnings. Currently, they must earn, on average, the weekly earnings that meet or are above the lower earnings limit. That's currently set at 125. And then employees must also inform their employer if they're unable to work in line with any deadlines set within the company policy. Where there aren't any deadlines within the policy, then there's that requirement to notify of absence within 7 days. But let's consider how this is changing, starting with when we could potentially see the reforms come about. And this is only a prediction. We believe that it has a potential for being enforced from April 2026. but I'm going to cover this a little bit more towards the end of the webinar. But I guess it's important just to sort of, from the thinking about your business, what's going to be necessary in the coming months, because whilst we don't have the definitive detail and confirmation of dates, there is an assessment we can make that makes us feel that April is going to be the likely date when it does come about. So the reforms, before I explain what those changes are, I'm just going to set some context. And the government's own analysis found that an estimated 1.3 million individuals are currently ineligible for sick pay because of either part-time or being a low earner. And if we think about the ultimate purpose of the Employment Rights Bill, it is about bringing fair treatment and to address inequality in employment. So when it comes to sickness, the government's objective is to enhance financial security for everybody. But they also want to curb the spread of illness within the workplace, because those who are on low incomes, part-time, or even those who have financial challenges, they will still try and attend work when really they should be home recovering and preventing the spread of any illness. But equally, it's about containing sickness to safeguard business productivity. But the reforms are going to be significant because of the potential impact on budgets and absence levels, and that's what we're going to delve into today. So, first of all, the law is going to remove the waiting days, which means paying statutory sick pay from the employee's first day of absence. Second, it's going to become universally available, and by that I mean all employees will become eligible regardless of earnings, because the government are going to remove the lower earnings limit that's currently a threshold for qualifying for sick pay. So that's going to be abolished. And instead, it's going to be replaced with a new method of calculating statutory sick pay for those who are on low wages. So it'll be variable statutory sick pay for low earners, and it's going to be calculated based on either 80% of the average weekly earnings or the flat rate of currently the statutory sick pay rate, whichever is the lower of those two. And then finally, statutory sick pay will become an area that will be enforced by the newly created Fair Work Agency. Now, that agency isn't going to be probably in place for probably 18 months, even 2 years, because of just logistics of what's needed to bring it into to be functioning. And by bringing SSP compliance under the remit of the Fair Work Agency, it means that they will have powers that allows the agency to penalise employers for that non-compliance of SSP. And incidentally, one of the recent amendments to the Employment Rights Bill has been to allow the Fair Work Agency the power to raise employment tribunal claims on behalf of the claimant, even if they don't want to. So that's going to be significant, and we're also going to see the timescales for raising tribunal claims extended from 3 to 6 months. So as a summary, they are the reforms to statutory sick pay, but we obviously want to know, well, what does it mean to us? How will it impact the business? Which we'll come on to, but I thought what would be helpful is to show you some examples of the reforms in practice. So in our first example, the employee earns on average £98 a week. When they're off sick, using the new rules, we know to calculate either we need to find out 80% of that average weekly earnings, and once we've done that, we need to then determine if that answer is less or more than the current statutory sick pay flat rate. That's currently £118.75. So as you can see in this example, the employee is going to be getting 80% of their average weekly earnings, because that equals £78.40, and that is lower than the current statutory the current flat rate for statutory sick pay. So in the second example, the employer earns on average 140 a week. They're off sick, and again, using the new rules, we need to know what 80% of the average weekly earnings are going to be. And once we've done that, we then need to understand, is it more or less than the SSP flat rate. So as this example shows, the employee will still receive the 80% of their average weekly earnings because it's the lower figure. And as you can see, the 80% of their earnings is £112. And clearly that's lower than the current flat rate. And then just in the final example here, where the employee earns on average £150 a week, 80% of that is £120, and clearly that is higher than the current rate for statutory sick pay, and therefore the lower of those two figures is the current flat rate of SSP, so they will receive the £118.75 for their sickness. So hopefully that just brings it to life, the reforms that I've just covered on the previous slide. As I did say in the comments actually on this webinar, you will be given a copy of these slides as well. But let's understand really now the potential implications, and as I said earlier, they are significant, and we could potentially see a rise in short-term sickness absences. So first of all, we will likely see an increase in the SSP claims. Universal eligibility is likely going to trigger more SSP claims, particularly from part-time and low-paid employees who previously were excluded. So we are naturally going to be seeing more people in scope, and therefore more people utilise statutory sick pay. And we'll see businesses needing to manage a higher volume of SSP, and therefore the administration and costs associated that will come with it, which means a potential for an increase in short-term sickness absence, and ultimately will result in more employees progressing through the company's absence management procedures, and therefore we will see potentially an increase in the business administration that runs alongside managing absence. When we think of budgets, then finance teams must account for potential SSP expenditure increases, so forecasting is essential in anticipating these changes, and particularly the impact for SMEs is likely to be more significant, simply because by the nature of their business they'll have that less flexibility with their budgets. And if we think about sales and productivity, you may need to consider the impact on these two areas. So as a business with rising employee costs, not just in regards to statutory sick pay, but there's all other increased costs as well, then do you consider your pricing strategy by passing the higher employment costs onto consumers rather than absorbing the costs yourselves? But also consider that with more frequent absences as well, productivity and sales could be hindered, especially in smaller teams, and could also add extra pressure onto teams and those who remain in work. We need to also think about our systems and the technology that we use. So payroll systems may need modifications to handle the new calculations and the record keeping requirements. You know, the new dual calculation method for low earners will be complicated, because obviously it will depend on each individual in each case, so it will necessitate system adjustments, and therefore we'll see an increase in administrative time for managing all of that. If you're a business that predominantly employs low earning staff due to the context in which you operate and the nature of the business, then you may see that overall rise in SSP costs, even with potentially lower individual payments. And then if we think about HR policy and procedure, it's going to be really essential that absence policies are updated, employees are informed about their enhanced or the changes to how sickness pay is managed through clear communication and training, and as well as how you manage absence within those documents. And finally, if we think about the enforcement, so I mentioned the Fair Work Agency, they're going to be overseeing SSP compliance. Now, the risk of penalties for incorrect administration will therefore escalate. We also anticipate, following how the bill has progressed through Parliament and the amendments that have been made, then we're expecting the Fair Work Agency to be able to bring tribunal claims on behalf of an employee, like I said on the other slide, even if the employee hasn't wanted to bring a claim. And furthermore, the time limits for bringing a claim is going to be increasing from 3 to 6 months. So this just really highlights the importance of having those robust and compliant processes for determining eligibility, calculating payments, record keeping, and potentially requiring and investing in staff training and internal audits. And the agency's involvement may also lead to more proactive investigations into employee sick pay rights as well. And I think just from how we've seen previous employment developments in the news over the years, there will be a lot of attention that we see in the news and in the press regarding these reforms, and that in itself naturally gets people questioning and asking questions of their employers and understanding their rights a little bit better. So at this point, I just want to run one quick poll, and it is about the impact for your organisation. So of the ones that we've got on the screen now, which do you think will be the biggest impact for your business? Think about which will be the most impactful. Only one can be chosen, although I'm sure all of them will apply, but to some different extent. And do let us know what you think. So I'll keep it open for a little bit longer. Okay, a few more seconds and then I'll close the poll. Okay, let's close and share the results and what have we got. So yeah, probably to be expected, I would say. Abby, don't know what you think, but 60% of you said increased SSP claims, sickness absence, absolutely. And then interestingly, the HR policy changes. I don't know if you've got any comments, observations on that yourself, Abby.
Yeah, so like I said earlier, in terms of the biggest worry being about the increase in the SSP claims for sure. We've got quite a few HR managers and teams on the line, so yeah, HR policy changes is going to be up there. It's going to be something we're going to be busy doing for sure. And then the other parts are obviously going to be, and especially after you've highlighted them, Victoria, the concern about how we're going to budget as a company for increased costs when we've got everything else to be budgeting for. For a lot of people, 1st of April would have been their financial year start. So if they're thinking about, okay, well, if that's through till March 31st next year, and this is potentially going to come in April 2026, we've got to start thinking about it.
Yeah. And are you starting to get any questions through?
Not too many. I would say it's more general to the clients are saying, I'm hearing lots about the Employment Rights Bill, but when is it going to take effect? And that's the key question, because people can then plan, can't they? If they know it's going to be October 2026, you feel like you've got a little bit more time. But if there's any insight at all of when it might be, if it's sooner, if it's this October or April 2025, then that's definitely something that the more proactive businesses will want to be looking at.
Yeah, and I mean, we assess it all the time. I mean, I'm monitoring the progress of the bill and the amendments going through, and just reading and keeping on top of legal commentary. And we will cover at the end some more insights around timings and generally the Employment Rights Bill itself. So, but yeah, it's hard when you're in limbo at the moment because the bill hasn't even been passed. But so what we know of the bill, it pretty much is going through as it originally was started, with some tweaks with amendments. But we just have to be prepared and just go on what the information we have now. But I'll come on to the timeframes and our assessment of those towards the end. So thank you for that. I'm going to hide that poll Let's move on to our next section, which is about the strategies that you can deploy for mitigating the rising short-term sickness, and then will hopefully mitigate those increased costs as well. So having robust policies and procedures is critical, as we've just both mentioned. You know, it's about ensuring there are clear reporting mechanisms in place for preventing those sickness absences and minimising length of absences. It's making sure that your employees fully understand the procedures for reporting sickness, including timelines, who to contact, and importantly, the repercussions of continued sickness absence. What's also vitally important is that all employees know how and where to access the policy, and then it must be accessible by everybody. Return to work interviews are such a crucial activity instrument as well, and that should form part of any absence policy. It's one of the most effective tools to prevent sickness absence, because the message it gives, it tells the employee that you are on top of absence management. You are having to account for your absences when you come back, and so it can be a deterrent. So return to work interviews are essentially really important after every absence, regardless of the duration, and that allows for early identification of any underlying issues, provides an opportunity for support to be offered, and as I said, can act as a deterrent for non-genuine absences. Consistent monitoring and tracking is also important, preventing ongoing absence. So consider implementing systems to monitor absence patterns, identify trends or triggers. You know, look at, is somebody having every Friday off? Are they having absences during the end of the month when the payroll is run? You know, it's about having a robust policy and procedure that gives you the mechanisms to be able to explore and really understand the absence in your business. You can also have clear trigger systems. So by defining clear trigger points for when you review an employee's absence record, that then initiates supportive conversations or further actions, and that's where your formal absence management process kicks in. And remember that fair and consistent application of the policy and procedure is essential to ensure that consistent treatment and lawful management of a person's sickness absence. And although recognise equally as well that in absence management, there does need to be that element of flexibility to consider individual circumstances. You know, what one employee may require for support may not be what another employee needs, and we've got to be mindful of the Equality Act and obligations to make reasonable adjustments as well. So proactive health and wellbeing initiatives are also important. It's about promoting that healthy workplace. So it's about looking at your culture and driving that positive health and wellbeing culture through the initiatives that you can offer. So it's about having a strategy for promoting that health and well-being that includes supportive psychological ill health, creating that positive and supportive work environment, having a strategy in place that you're focusing on mental health support, as well as other support for physical ergonomic conditions. So have those ergonomic assessments. And then if we think about early intervention and support, you know, these are also valuable strategies that relies on maintaining reasonable contact with your employees during short-term absences, so you can show support, and it helps ultimately facilitate a smoother return. It can also demonstrate care and concern for their well-being, helps maintain a connection to the workplace, and allows for early identification of any potential barriers to returning. Reasonable contact can also help to reassure employees that they are valued and their absence is noted, and thereby potentially reducing feelings of isolation and encouraging a more timely and positive return. Now, occupational health is a key initiative for any business, and it actually is vital to the ongoing absence management procedures, and it must certainly be carried out before there's any decision that's taken when you're considering the very end of any formal process, whether there is a capability dismissal or not. So absolutely make sure that occupational health is incorporated, or seeking other medical evidence and advice either through a GP or specialists, etc. So consider having occupational health professionals for employees with frequent short-term absences or underlying health conditions. As I said, it's really important because they can also then provide expert advice and recommendations for support and adjustments. And then finally, an employee assistance programme, also known as the EAP, which is a cost-effective way to help keep absenteeism reduced. So it's essentially an external provider that they tend to provide 24/7 confidential help through telephone service offer, web site information, or face-to-face counselling. And it's all confidential, but it's a way of an employee being able to seek early support that ultimately helps prevent absence as a result of what the concern is that they may have going on in their life. And then facilitating a smooth return to work. That's about phased return plans. So for the employees returning after a more significant short-term absence, consider then implementing a phased return to work with reduced hours or duties, seeking guidance from occupational health, a GP or medical specialists. It's also important to make workplace adjustments because these are a legal requirement where the health issue is classed as a disability for the purpose of the Equality Act. But even if it isn't, it is better to have someone in work working on adapted hours or adapted duties than to have them off sick. So all in all, having some adjustments made to support somebody coming back and staying in at work is beneficial. And reasonable adjustments can be to the employee's role, work environment, equipment, hours, and as I said, they support the return and prevent reoccurrence of the absence. And once they are returned, then just make sure that you run those regular check-ins with them, check that they're okay, getting on okay, any adjustments that have been in place are working, are supporting, and ensure that they have basically the necessary support that they need for being back. And then an important activity is training, and it's about ensuring you equip your line managers with the skills to effectively manage sickness absence, how to conduct return to work interviews and have those supportive conversations with employees about their health and well-being. Management training is essential. It's essential that it's regular, not a one-off, and that it focuses not just on the technical side of applying your organisation's policy, but actually the soft skills as well. And it's so important about how a manager communicates and interacts with their employee in the way they do that when it relates to anything. But from a sickness absence point of view, you know, quite often there needs to be that more compassionate and non-judgmental kind of approach to when you're handling conversations. So a lot of the training needs to be about the soft skills as well as the technical. And so by proactively implementing these kind of strategies, you can cultivate that healthy workforce by identifying and addressing potential issues early and managing short-term absences more effectively, and therefore you're mitigating the financial and operational risks that are associated with the upcoming SSP reforms. We are going to be adding to our HR Doc shop on our main website a new template impact assessment, and that will be looking at the SSP reform specifically, and it will be a template assessment form that you will be able to use to work out how each of these reforms that I've mentioned earlier on will impact your business specifically. So they will be added in due course, so do keep an eye on that. You can sign up to our newsletters to keep informed as well as developments, but we are going to be publishing a new impact assessment tool very shortly. So hopefully that will help everyone in preparing for the reform. So I've got a couple of questions now in some polls. So I'm just going to share the first one, and it's about the steps that you think you're going to be taking in the coming months to prepare for the reforms. Keep it open for a little bit longer. Let's see. Okay. Let's close the poll. And I'll share the results with everyone. So what do we have? So, yet to be expected, the 86% review and update your policy and internal processes. That's brilliant. Really good to see that actually developing a strategy to practically enhance health and well-being. That's vital. You know, if we think about, you know, in the last few years, stress-related absences in particular have massively increased in volume. Early intervention, that's absolutely really important, and you're going to be reviewing your sick pay scheme. Now, interestingly, that's a really a good point there, because just be careful in terms of reviewing your sick pay scheme, because, and I'll come on to it later, because of the scheme, the SSP rules changing, if you offer enhanced sick pay, there are some potential implications, but I'm going to come on to that in later on in the webinar. But I don't know, Abby, have you got any comments on those results there?
Yeah, I'm not surprised to see the 32% on sick pay scheme, because I've had a couple of questions in the chat that I've sort of signposted to say you're going to mention this about enhanced in a moment. So that's obviously on people's minds. So I'm not surprised on that, the high percentage there, and hopefully we can help people out. But yeah, the 86% on the review of policy and process, and perhaps we can throw in there, you know, contract as well, because if people have got contractual benefits to do with sickness and absence, and again that's something you're going to touch on, isn't it, in terms of terms and conditions change. So yeah, so much to think about.
There is so much, but we're here to help. So let's close that poll and let's take you through to the next section, and this is the couple of considerations that I mentioned at the start and links into what we've just briefly mentioned as a result of that poll. So this slide is an illustration of our own assessment as to what, when we think the reforms and which reforms could come into effect. So hopefully it's clear enough to say that it's not confirmed, because as I said earlier, the bill is still progressing through. We do expect the bill to be given royal assent around July time. That means it becomes an act of law. So it's progressing quite quickly now in the House of Lords. But I need to stress it's not confirmed. The government haven't communicated anything. But when we consider all, there's about 29, 30 different reforms as part of the Employment Rights Bill. I mean, it's massive. And when we consider each of these areas, some will need separate regulations drafting after the it's become an act. Some of the reforms will need new codes of practices being created. Others will need existing codes of practices amended. And clearly, employers are going to need time to prepare and change any systems, processes ready for the change to come into force. So it is going to be a phased implementation. And so knowing which of the reforms need more information and detail, it can help form our assessment, which is what is illustrated here. So there's a couple that I've highlighted here. The first one in the pink column, which could be potentially be introduced from October, is what's known as a ban on fire and rehire. Now you might think, what's it got to do with sick pay? I'm going to come on to that in a moment, because it could be significant, particularly to those of you who operate enhanced sick pay. And the second highlight is the second section here, the cream grey box, and the list of what we could potentially see in April 2026 next year. Now, as I said right at the outset, there's going to be two main reforms to statutory sick pay: the removal of the waiting days and the new calculation method when you've got low earners. Now, in theory, if the bill becomes an act of law from around July, then there doesn't need to be any further regulations developed. There doesn't need to be any codes of practice. The change by removing waiting days can be instant. Now, we don't think that's going to happen, but what we tend to see is changes in employment law tend to take place April and October in the year. I mean, there have been times when it's been in between, but generally they're the months where you do see a lot of change. So whilst the removal of the waiting days can be quick to introduce, and in theory it could be introduced from October, we don't think it will be. We think it's going to be it'll be introduced along with the other half of the reform, which is that new method for calculating sick pay for low earners. And because employers need time to change their systems, create new processes for calculating using that new method, and we need regulations and clarity around how it works, then clearly that can't be something that comes about this year. It is going to be at least next year. So we're thinking April, because April we see a lot of changes to statutory payments anyway. So that's our assessment. We think the SSP reforms will come out together, potentially could be next April. And I guess, like Abby said earlier, it's not about, we don't want to scaremonger. There's not too much that we can say for sure. We can only go by what we're seeing in terms of the bill when it gets progressing through Parliament, the legal commentary, what's actually involved for it to be brought into practice. And even though none of this is confirmed or definitive, it at least gives us an outline of what we can plan for, and to start taking steps to think about actually the implications. And like I said, that impact assessment tool that will become available will be a starting point to really understand how these sick pay reforms will impact your workforce, your ability to your budgets, your marketing, sales, all aspects of your business because of the knock-on impact of it. So this is what I just wanted to share with you. And just for information, you'll see other reforms dotted about in the relevant time frames there that you can see as well. Yeah, that's just our own assessment. But stay informed, follow us and keep up to date with our newsletters, because we also follow and announce news as well. So the thing about the sick pay terms and what we said on the poll a moment ago is the ban on fire and rehire. Because we've got the potential for that to come into force from October, it could be significant to those of you who offer enhanced sick pay. And so a question I would ask is, do you need to revisit your sick pay terms? And 32% of you said that you're planning to review your sick pay. Now, I'm going to quickly call up a poll because I didn't run it at the time. So excuse me for that. So I'm just, hopefully you can see this poll. Abby, tell me if you can't. But yes, I can see results coming in. Are you one of those employers who offer enhanced sick pay? Because this particular section will be very important. Okay, I'll keep it open for a little bit longer. Okay, so let's close that and we'll share the results. And I think, I don't know what you think, Abby, but I probably expected more employers than not to offer enhanced. What do you think?
No, I was expecting it to be lower
The other way,
because,
okay.
and that's why, yeah, it was really interesting that you asked our demographic of, and we saw it was small to medium mainly that are on
Yeah,
this
true.
webinar today. So I would expect it not that many people to be doing enhanced sick pay because there's just so many costs that employers, have to bear now. So giving enhanced anything above statutory now for small to medium is becoming unaffordable.
Yeah, okay. So this is actually really important now then in terms of this fire and rehire ban that they're potentially bringing in from October. So, for example, if you're operating a sick pay scheme that's enhanced and the wording in your contract and your policy is very much saying that it mirrors how statutory sick pay is managed and worked, then it's going to mean that the implications to when the statutory sick pay change will have implications for your enhanced sick pay element because it mirrors how statutory works. The ban on fire and rehire will make it harder after October, assuming it comes in October. It will make it harder for you to change your contractual sick pay terms. This is because the ban on fire and rehire, which under the bill is about the variation of terms and conditions of employment, it's section 104, it prevents employers forcing through changes to contractual terms. And whilst at the moment employers can approach employees to consult and change contractual terms, and yes, there can be risks associated with it, but it can in theory be done. When this reform comes in, it's going to make it extremely hard to change contractual terms. The reform is that a dismissal will become automatically unfair if the primary reason is either the employer tried to change the employee's contract and the employee did not agree, or the employer hired someone else to do the same or very similar job that the dismissed employee was doing. So if you're trying to change your contractual sick pay after this reform has come into, after the fire and rehire reform has come into place, it's going to be extremely, extremely difficult because why would an employee want to have lesser sick pay terms? And with this reform, because it will be an automatic unfair dismissal if you're trying to force through the change, the reasonableness of the dismissal will not be considered. So where you're probably in most or other unfair dismissal claims, there is a fairness and reasonableness element to the legal test. That won't exist in this reform. There will be a narrow exception for an employer to be able to force through a contractual change, but only if the employer can prove with strong and robust evidence of the imminent closure of the business due to severe financial difficulties, and therefore that dismissal was a genuine last resort. Although it's going to be a hard test to meet, employers will need to be prepared to show robust evidence from accounting reports, internal, external accounting reports, all of the financial data that you have. So there will be an exception, but it will be extremely limited for when you can rely on that. So I guess for those of you who do operate enhanced sick pay, check the wording of your scheme rules. If it is very much aligned with the statutory sick pay and the way it's managed, then clearly when that changes, it'll have implications for the rules on your enhance. So it's really important to consider now the implications of that change before the ban on fire and rehire comes in. I would say this is probably an area that we would encourage getting employment advice on it because of the risks, but definitely put it as a priority for understanding the implications of the SSP changes. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. As I said, it was an important consideration that was really essential that we cover off today. So coming up for 10 to 11. I'll just go through this slide, and then if we've got any questions, we'll probably have time for a few. So this is really just some of the best practices that we advocate for working in HR. And that's really about cultivating a culture of well-being. You want that positive culture. Prioritising mental health is really vital. As I said, the statistics for mental health are really significant. We see it repeatedly published through the Health and Safety Executive. Promote physical health, because ultimately both together being supported will help to reduce sickness absence. Encourage and foster that positive working environment. Encourage transparency in communications. Deal with any grumbles and concerns early on, promptly, in a transparent way, so that you've got that positive working environment. And encourage work-life balance. We're seeing more and more flexibility in the way employers are letting their employees work. Think about how your employees can foster that work-life balance, with everyday demands. It's whether it can work for your business. Proactive communication and engagement is vital, so having those regular wellbeing check-ins. So line managers having one-to-ones with their employees, that's a perfect opportunity to check in with their individual. Having those open communication channels, having that open door philosophy, allowing employees to feedback. So use employee satisfaction surveys, and promote health and wellbeing awareness as well. So, for example, April was Stress Awareness Month. It's thinking about how you can tie in your business initiatives with national campaigns. Early intervention and support is fundamental. You could consider wellbeing risk assessments. Management training, as I said, is essential in any aspect of human resource management. It must be regular, mustn't become stale, and it's not just those technical skills, but the soft skills as well. And think about reasonable adjustments. Like I say, it's not just about, there's a legal obligation in certain cases, but actually it's the right thing to do. And it's far better to have somebody in work doing some work than not at work at all. So if you can make some adaptations, even on a temporary basis, to help get somebody who is struggling to help with their health, then that's a far better outcome than them being off sick. And return to work interviews, like I say, the data and statistics shows that's one of the most important tools for preventing, deterring sickness absence, because basically you're making the individual accountable for their absence. And it's not about saying absences aren't genuine. Our aim is always to go in being compassionate and taking the employee's word as what they're saying. But there can, no doubt be cases where people do take sickness when it's not genuine. And then use data to help you drive your strategy and to make those continuous improvements. So looking at your absence data, are there trends? Analyse your absence patterns. Evaluate wellbeing initiatives. So go out and run surveys with your employees to understand their views on your wellbeing packages that you offer, and always, look for continuous review and adaptation. So we'll see if we can take just a few questions. If there are lots, then I can follow up afterwards with an FAQ. Probably next week it would be followed up with. But Abby, do we have any questions that we can help with? Let's have a look.
Yes.
Brilliant.
I know we've already got time for a couple, and I've written a few down to ask you, Victoria. But just so that you know, I've been typing away so fast, answering lots and lots of questions.
Brilliant.
So
thanks, Abby.
Apologies for anybody who's had a very, very brief answer, but I was trying to get through as many as possible. So Victoria, have a little look at those afterwards in case there's more detail to be given or anything like that. But yeah, there was quite a few people were asking, and be interested just to raise with you if you know. So no problem if you don't. But are we aware if there's going to be any change to the self-cert system and the fit note? You know, whether it's still a fit note from 8 days onwards of sickness and being able to self-certify, you know, from day 1 to 7. Have you read anything
I
about that
haven't seen
thing?
anything on that, and I would envisage there will be further information coming out from the government to support the calculation method changing, which we expect next April. So we will get more information around the detail of managing that reform. But it brings into question lots of things, doesn't it? How does it work? But yeah, I haven't read anything, but no doubt there will be something. But yeah.
Yes, probably some guidelines way after it becomes law.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's just me being pessimistic. And then another question, and this is something for a follow-up, I think, was that the example that you gave when, you know, calculating it was done on a weekly basis. And one of the questions was, what about if it was just 1 or 2 days of sickness? So perhaps when you have a look at the FAQ, we could give an example if there was just 1 day of sickness, for example. That would be really helpful, I think.
Yeah.
And then one more, if we could just look at if somebody offers SSP only, so no enhanced, and wants to do that for new employees, sort of post October 2025, where, you know, we predict that it's going to then be much more difficult to make changes to contractual enhanced sick pay. Do we think that it would be a good strategy based on affordability then, that if we are not able to make so easily changes to contract post October, that we can keep people who are on contractual enhanced sick pay as is, but then any new employees that come into the business say it's only statutory sick pay because the business genuinely can't afford to continue doing enhanced for everybody. It sounds quite practical and reasonable to me. Do you have a view?
I think I'm in line with agreeing with you, Abby, in that it seems reasonable in that. So you'll have new starters on new contracts coming in, so they're signing up to those contractual terms. So they won't be getting the enhanced element. They're just purely going from SSP, but from day 1. So you're taking the initiative up front early, aren't you, before it's even come in? So that is an enhancement, if you like, at this point. Yeah, I think you can do it because ultimately the existing members of staff who are on the enhanced sick pay, they're already getting enhanced elements, aren't they? So they're not
exactly that.
They're not losing anything. So I think you can, and it's part of your integration or implementation of the reform. So that's my view.
Yeah, I agree, because I think if you've got the right business case and the right financial evidence to show it, then absolutely you can do it. Just like in the past where you will have had a certain section of the workforce on a more enhanced pension package, for example, but then you can't afford to do that for newer employees from a certain point. So you draw the line, don't you? So yeah, I think that would be absolutely right to do.
What I will add here is, I know we're talking about SSP, but for everybody on this webinar, if there's any contractual benefits elements that you offer, just think about if there are going to be financial challenges in the future, just think about whether, if you are planning to change any contractual term, just think about the timings, knowing that we've got this fire rehire coming in, because it's not going to just apply to your SSP as a contractual term. You could, for example, have in place currently a contractual bonus scheme. But what if in the future you need to remove it or change it? It's going to be very, very, very difficult under the fire rehire. So I think now's a good time to think about all contractual elements that you offer, and take a view as to, is it sustainable in the new world, if you like. But going back to that impact assessment, we're publishing impact assessment templates for all of the reforms. It won't just be for the SSP. So I think planning now for all of the reforms and thinking about all of them will help the longer term, if that makes sense.
It does make sense, and that's probably a good point to conclude it, Victoria, looking at the timescales. But we will get back to everybody, won't we, with answers to the questions that have come up.
Yeah, just one final quick poll that I would be very appreciate that you look to participate in, and it's whether you'd like us to contact you after today's webinar and how we can support your business, whether it's HR services, payroll, health and safety, HR administration, or of course project work. So do let us know. There's obviously a lot coming in over the next couple of years. So if you do let us know if you'd like us to contact you about how we may be able to support you. So I'll just keep that open for a moment, and then I've got a few more slides I can take you through as well before we close. Okay, let's just close that. Okay. So please do keep in touch with us. As I said, we continue to monitor the reforms, the bill as it progresses, update our assessment of timeframes. You can drop me an email there. Our website, there's a QR code for our LinkedIn page, and obviously you can always give us a call as well. So please do keep in touch with us and follow us on socials. And then our HR knowledge base is our online portal. It provides all our template HR documents, policies, articles, guides. So we are continually updating that and adding to it, especially now with all the employment reform. So you'll get extra information there to what is obviously on our normal website. So do look into that if that's of interest to you. And then if you like our webinars and would like to continue attending our monthly free webinars, then these are what we have coming up. And we've got one in June, one in July. Sorry, there's a typo there. So next month, we're going to be talking about the change to 0-hour contracts. That's a massive reform put forward. We're going to be looking at family-friendly leave and flexible working in July. August is all about the probation periods. That's going to be massive with the day one unfair dismissal right coming in potentially next year. We'll be looking at discrimination, the 4 primary areas in September. October is all about protecting your business from tribunals. November is about the budget implications on human resource management and obviously the reforms as well. And then planning for change is all in December, ready for 2026. So do check our webinar schedule out on our website or the knowledge base if you are a member of our knowledge base. And we're offering a free HR 30-minute consultation with one of our experienced HR advisors. So do check us out. You can find the QR code there that will give you further information. And to conclude this webinar, I just want to thank you all for attending, for participating in the polls and sending us your questions, and a big thank you to Abby as well for co-hosting this webinar with me today. It's been great. So thank you, and hopefully see you all next month. Thank you.